Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. So, hope everyone's doing good. It is Tuesday at 10:33. Another rainy day. Surprise, surprise. We've been getting so much rain. We have like 2 days, 1 or 2 days of really, really nice weather, and then it just rains or it's cold. So, it is what it is. But hey, it sucks, but what can you do about it? So, yeah, I just finished up a video of my review. I went on Sunday to see the new Marvel movie Thunderbolts. Had a pretty good experience. I thought it was a pretty solid movie. It was entertaining. It felt a little bit more, kind of on track compared to a lot of the really, just an endless amount of movies that have come out in the Marvel universe that have been either not very good or just really, I don't know, kind of big letdowns or just really uninteresting. Ever since Endgame, Avengers Endgame, and Spider Man's Homecoming, especially Endgame, and my favorite, pretty much pound for pound, my favorite Marvel movie of all time, the Avengers Infinity War. I started watching it again last night. I don't know, I was talking to a friend on the phone, and I was, because lately I've been watching a ton of westerns. I've been watching a shit ton of westerns, so I've been, and I want to get back to it because there's still a lot more movies to cover. But I've been watching a shit ton of westerns, and then you know, was talking to a friend, and something that they said or something we were talking about, it made me think of. We were talking about Marvel. I think that's what happened. I had told her about going to see Thunderbolts. She has no interest at all in any of the movies, and I was telling her in a real brief kind of time period of, like, the history of some of these movies, and how I really love the first phase of, the first 5 to 7 to 10 years of the movies that came out. Big fan. I'm a comic book nerd. But then how I got really really sick and tired of all of the movies and kind of where it's been for the last 7 to 8 years, and it's been really depressing and just not into it. And I had said that, well, Thunderbolts was good. It was a movie that kind of felt like it was a little more solid than most of the other films. It had a little bit more of a foundation behind it, and it was a little more entertaining than other films. But ultimately, it was still kind of a disappointment. But I was talking about the movies in the Marvel universe that I really really love, and somehow we started talking about the Avenger films, and she hadn't seen those either. And I had said, brought up Infinity War, you know. So then in a conversation, I was like, oh shit, I want to watch Infinity War. So after I got done talking with her, I put in Infinity War, and I've been watching that. So I might be taking a couple of nights break. I might finish. I'm gonna probably finish Infinity War tonight, and I'm gonna probably have to watch Endgame after that, and then get back to doing the westerns because I need to do those. It's been really great. I mean, I've literally been watching westerns for like almost every night for the last week and a half to 2 weeks. I've watched about 6 to 7 movies. Yeah, that's probably 7 movies, pure westerns, and it's been great. But I think I need a little bit of a break for a while. It's funny. I don't. That doesn't happen to me with horror films. I can watch horror films any day of the week. I never get tired of it. I never get fatigued. Not that I got fatigued. I was like, I think I need a little break, and I, when we were talking about Marvel, I was like, you know what, I kind of want to watch this, so I'm just going to watch this. But I'll get back to watching the collection of westerns that I've been in the middle of doing. I finished up the first disc, and there was about I think I believe it was like 4 to 5 movies on there. All those shows have been up, and then I did a show. I started the second disc, and I watched one movie from that, and I put that up there. and that was really great. So, and then on top of it all, on I think it was, what was it, Saturday night, during one of the videos, it made me think of really, it made me think of The Unforgiven. So today's show is going to be on Clint Eastwood's The Unforgiven. I've talked about this movie before, but this movie is, it's just such a goddamn classic that I'm going to make another video for it. So it is what it is. And it was funny too, during the conversation that I had with my friend last night, I had said, and I said, well, thanks. Now I'm going to watch Affinity War in the midst of all this other shit we were talking about. And, she had not seen it, didn't know anything about it, and said that it wasn't really a very good movie. Well, I should say, I said I felt like Affinity War is a classic. And, just for being a movie. And, she doesn't equate that, you know, as a film that is in the comic book world, that it's not possible for a movie like that to be a classic. And I'm like, that's no, that's kind of one sided and kind of judgmental, especially on something you haven't seen, and that's not really accurate. Because I think a film, at the end of the day, a movie is either going to really entertain you or it's not, and it doesn't matter which style, it doesn't matter what genre it is. We just have hang-ups about things that we don't know about, that we don't see, that we haven't experienced, and we want to generalize. So, and that's just like self-bias. So, anyway, and I had said, just continuing to talk about Affinity War, and I said, yeah, I've done a few shows on it. I've done a few shows on that movie. And she's like, really? Wow, you do more than one show or two? You've covered a movie, you take a movie and then you do like multiple shows on it. And I was like, yeah, well, yeah, for me, it's like, and it really is the experience of how I enjoy movies. I always feel like, there's like certain books that we always go back to. Like I just read for I've probably read it about 7 to 8 times at this point. It's my favorite book of all time. I just finished Dune again, and I just love that book. And the book has so many things in it, so many layers, and I get something different out of it all the time. I've been doing audiobooks, and I really, really enjoy it. And I've been reading a lot. Technically, I've been reading a lot and doing the audiobook thing. And I just finished up, Dune for the 7th or 8th time. And to me, it's the same thing. Like, you check out an album that you really love. You're going to revisit it and probably listen to it, a bazillion times in your lifetime. The same thing I feel like with a piece of art, a painting. You're going to want to always look at it and experience it. Or your favorite movie or favorite movies or your favorite TV shows. You're going to revisit them, or something you discover, and you want that experience. You want that because it's enriching. It's fulfillment, and it's that beautiful experience. And a lot of these things, a lot of those experiences, I feel like with certain movies and certain forms of art, depending on where you are in your life, and you can get something different a lot of the times out of that experience, over time. I equate it to like, it's like that fine wine kind of concept. Things age, but they tend to get better in some ways, because things can resonate more. So I kind of felt like that was kind of my feeling around art, and why I don't have any reservations about talking about a movie, multiple times, or doing a show on, because for me, I get a different, if it's something I'm really, really into, I will revisit it and have that experience multiple times. And I will always come away with it, or from that experience, having something new that I discovered. Dune, for instance, I never did an audiobook for it before, and I had a very different experience, and it was really amazing. And so I feel art, it's all subjective, whether it's going to resonate with you, but for me, it's kind of all the same thing. So I don't really have a problem with doing that because I feel like there's always a different perspective to bring on your connection or your experience around something that really inspires you. So that's it. But anyway, so I'm doing another show on Unforgiven, and again, I watched this. I think it was Saturday night. This Tuesday. I watched this again last night because I I just had a craving to watch it. I got this really amazing Blu-ray edition. This is a really awesome version of this classic film. I got this. I think I got this last year. I can't remember where I bought it. I don't know if I bought it. I don't think I got it at Goodwill. I can't remember where I got this, but I've had this for, actually, I think I've had this for a couple of years, a few years maybe. And again, you know, growing up, I saw this movie when I was in high school. It was a movie that I saw. It came out. I mean, Jesus, it's pretty old. It came out in 1992, so I was pretty much a little kid when this film first came out. And again, 92 was at this point 1,000 years ago, and I was a real, I think I was a freshman in high school when this movie came out. So I was a little kid. I was barely a teenager. And growing up, my dad, like I had said before on in some of the other videos that I've done where I've talked a lot about westerns. I grew up watching westerns, mainly because of my dad. His favorite western of all time is Shane, which is actually a really awesome movie. But I grew up watching a lot of the John Wayne classics, a lot of the John Ford films. I got exposed to, a lot of the earlier Clint Eastwood films that came before this. And my dad was a big fan of those action movies, Magnum Force and all those great films that he did. But and also the westerns. And so, it was always something I really liked. And, I probably got exposed to seeing my first western, right around the time that, when I really got exposed to, well, just films in general. you know, for me, it was getting exposure a lot of to a lot of these films, mainly through my mom. But watching Psycho, watching my exposure to Alfred Hitchcock. That was the first kind of director, and his films were the first films I remember where I was like, where my mom was very much a fan, still is, and she introduced me to a lot of those films. And then from there, it was watching all kinds of slasher movies, and I got exposed to horror from that. And then but my dad was always watching Western, so I got exposed to that. But it wasn't until I saw, I remember when The Unforgiven came out, and I remember seeing it for the first time, and I think the first time I watched it was on cable, actually. My grandmother lived across the street, and she had cable, and HBO was a regular network at the time, and was great because you would have all of these movies. And I don't think at the time we didn't have HBO, and we would go over my grandparents' house on the weekends a lot, and like have a big meal or order pizza and then watch a movie. I had a lot of memories of watching movies together with my family. Like the first time I saw Die Hard was like a big family kind of gathering with like food, and we all sat around and watched Die Hard for the first time, and that was my first time as well. And I remember Unforgiven was that experience too. And I remember my grandmother was a huge Clint Eastwood fan, and I remember seeing it, The Unforgiven, for the first time, and it was the first. It was kind of a pivotal moment for me because that was when I really was like, this really is an amazing film. Like suddenly I felt more into westerns at that point, and I took more notice to this genre, and I love it. I love the western, but this the Unforgiven, seeing that at a young age, that was the movie that really got me interested in this genre. Outside of horror and science fiction. And lately, like the reason I've been doing these shows on westerns is because I really love the spaghetti westerns. Those are pretty much my favorite. But I'm a huge John Ford fan, and John Wayne fan, and I love the old school. It's like everything. I kind of go back to the more gritty or the exploitation. I love the Italian spaghetti western exploitation films and all the great films that came out in the 60s and 70s. And that part of it was something I wanted to kind of explore more because I have done that, but I don't have a ton of those films, particularly the Italian westerns. I don't have a ton of those movies in my collection, but I'm looking to get more and more. I have DVDs of some of those films, but I need to get more. I need to take a little bit of a deeper dive. Um, and with watching all of these films that I just recently got for free, that's been really amazing because I've been all of the movies I've been seeing, I had never seen before. But through all of this, I was like, I really want to watch The Unforgiven, and I have to say, The Unforgiven is, I think it's for me. I mean, there's so many great westerns, and it's always next to impossible to kind of pick your favorite movie in a genre. Sometimes it's pretty clear to me, and it's pretty, you know, I don't know. It's like this crystallized thing, like my favorite movie of all time is The Godfather. Like that's just you know that's just such a powerful film and just resonates with me. And then I also feel like when it comes to horror films, I think probably my favorite horror film of all time is The Beyond by Lucio Fulci. I think pound for pound, that's the greatest horror film ever made. But again, that's a tough thing to say because there are a billion other movies that are, in a lot of ways equally as good. So, but those are like my to go to movies, as far as those things go. And, probably my favorite action science fiction movie would be Predator. Like, I would say that's definitely my favorite Schwarzenegger film. So, it definitely has, that definitely, those things definitely can, you know, can be a thing. I think even though, when you say horror and you say, dramas or crime movies about the mafia, there's so many. I mean, when I said, the Godfather being my favorite film of all time, I mean, you have, and it is, but, you have, movies like Goodfellas or Mean Streets, and I mean, so many other, impeccable classics that go along with it. But for me, there are certain movies that just kind of rise to that occasion, or rise to the top for me automatically. And I have to say, like when it comes to the genre of the western, I really think at the end of the day, the Unforgiven is that movie. I think it's, for me personally, I think it's the greatest western ever made. Again, I've seen this movie. Again, when I first saw it, I saw it on HBO as a little kid, and then after that, I saw it a bunch of other times on TV, and then, I think eventually seeing it a bunch of times on DVD. It was always one of those movies, and I have lots of memories too of like going over to my family's house, my parents' house, after seeing it when I was a kid, and The Unforgiven would be on television. It was one of those movies that if it was on television, I would just have to watch it. I always had that experience with like well, The Godfather for sure. Like whenever that was just on, we would just watch it. You know, it's that good. Or another film that does that for me is Jaws, which I realize I don't think I've ever done a show on Jaws, which is a fucking crime. I need to buy that on Blu-ray. But that's another one of those films. If it's on cable, I'm gonna just watch it. You know, there's a bunch of other movies like that. But I remember having that same experience when The Unforgiven was on television. So I've The Unforgiven is a movie I've seen so many times I have lost count. And again, it's one of those things. I watched it again the other night on Saturday, and there were things about it that there were these little kind of subtle things that happened in the film that I wasn't quite maybe aware of before. It was really interesting, and that's the reason I keep revisiting these classic films because again, it goes back to my first way of explaining my whole kind of weird process around film and art. And again, I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, and I can't. I wish I could remember where I bought this, where I bought The Unforgiven on Blu-ray. I can't remember if it was Bull Moose or I don't think it was Bull Moose, and I can't remember if it was. I think it was probably at Goodwill. But again, when I bought this is a beautiful edition. There's hours of special features on here, like it's crazy. There's like 3 or 4 documentaries. There's a really great retrospective, like a little mini documentary that was made about Clint Eastwood's life on here. That's narrated by John Cusack, the fantastic actor, which is really awesome. It goes into such detail about his career and his life. I've always been a huge Clint Eastwood fan, and so I'm a huge fan of his movies, and I think he is you know, lately he's made when he's almost 100 years old. He's made some films that are okay, but when he's made a good film, they are just spectacular. And he won Best Picture for this and Best Director for this movie when it came out. And I think again, I think that this is pound for pound the greatest Western ever made. Um, when I bought this on Blu-ray, I was so excited because I'd only seen it on cable, really, and then also DVD. I don't have. I have a copy of The Unforgiven on VHS, I believe, and so literally, again, I've described that experience many times, but literally watching this on Blu-ray was like watching for the first time. This is just a beautiful, beautiful transfer. And again, it stars the late great Gene Hackman, who recently passed away under some of the most bizarre circumstances. Incredible, just an incredible, incredible story. It is, and of course Morgan Freeman. It's I love the William Money who Clint Eastwood plays. I love his character so much because he is that you get this indication early on that he's trying to live this relatively peaceful, humble life when he gets older, and you learn through the film and through kind of the character development that at one point he was kind of this monstrous kind of murderous person, and he's tried to kind of bury that dark side, and he's tried to move on, and he's tried to you know return to some form of normalcy. And then there's a series of events that happen to where by the end of the film he becomes that crazed killer again. And I just love how you see his character develop, and then how it comes back to where he comes back to more or less his true nature as a character. It's just so great. And it's got it's a very reflective film. It's a very personal film. I think that this movie, Clint Eastwood's described this movie as kind of an anti-violence kind of a film. About, it's kind of, I don't know. I think in some ways this is the first Western that I have ever seen that really deals with like kind of the psychological ramifications of like, you know, of a person who is coming to terms with really horrible things that they've done, particularly around killing other people, and seeing that, exploring that side and how violence is and death is just, and especially murder is just a horrible thing, and you see these characters battling these demons because of their dark history. And it's, I don't know, I think it's really, I mean, a lot of westerns are brutally violent, and I love the brutally violent westerns, especially the Italian ones. But this is really one of the first films I felt really explored, kind of the characters coming to terms with some of the things that they've done, and kind of getting into the psychology of that, and the remorse, and the horrible baggage of what they have to carry around with their lives, and it does explore that, and that it really is, you know, a kind of a deep psychological exploration of those things, the fallout after someone commits, horrible acts. In this case, murder. And I've seen interviews with Clint Eastwood, and he has talked about it, where this movie is essentially kind of an anti-violence film, more or less. But part of me honestly kind of chuckles at that a little bit, because, yeah, it does take, this film definitely does take a deeper exploration into that psychology around those things. And I don't know of any westerns that really explore those things that I know of. But the third act, the third act or final act of this film is super fucking brutal and uber dark, and everyone dies, and Clint Eastwood's character William Munny reemerges as this killing machine. Where he, at one point when he was younger, he killed women, children, killed whole families. He just was a psychopath. And you see by the end of the film that he turns back to this person. And I just love the arc of his character. And I just think it's kind of ironic, maybe funny, that Clint Eastwood pens this movie as kind of being an anti-violence film, which I get, because in a lot of ways the first act and the exploration of those things is definitely a massive component to this film. But by the end of the film, I mean, he's fucking kills everybody, and it's super dark. It's one of the darker westerns, I think, too. I think this movie, especially by the end, when he turns and gets really mad, and essentially it becomes a revenge film because of one of the Morgan Freeman's character, who gets killed by Gene Hackman, and Clint Eastwood, William Munny, uses this as an act of revenge. It's it's a really dark movie. I always forget how dark the last half of this movie is, and it's so satisfying. I love the score too, because again, this movie has a really cool juxtaposition. It's very reflective. It's kind of evocative, and it's kind of I don't know, meditative. It's really beautiful. The score is amazing, but by the end of it, it becomes really dark. I just love this movie, and to me, it's one of the ultimate payoffs for a western, and just for a movie in general. So yeah, it's a masterpiece. If you haven't seen this, you live in the cave. The Unforgiven, pound for pound, for me, the greatest western ever made. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.